Okay. Yeah, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat and interact if you want. This is supposed to be a very interactive session. And please feel free to put up any questions you have in the Q&A section as well. And if the chair upvotes them, those questions will be asked, to the panelists. So yeah. Okay. I think we can begin. So yeah. Good evening, everybody. I'm Ananya from Rethinking Economics India Network, and it is my pleasure and privilege to welcome you all to the third session of our series of events where we discussed issues around capitalism in March and are discussing patriarchy this month and try to draw connections between the two systems. The Rethinking Economics India Network is a national network of the global rethinking economics movement. We operate as a nationwide ecosystem of stakeholders in the space of pluralist and heterodox economics and are looking to interface with individuals, academia, civil society, and other organizations in order to encourage teaching, learning, and discussion for scaling collaborative efforts towards a better, more inclusive economics for India and contribute towards the global movement at large. Today's event is a panel discussion titled Gender, Debt, and Austerity, the Patriarchal Foundations of Capitalism. And for the session today, we have with us on the panel, Dr. Veronica Gago, who teaches political science at the Universidad, the Nacional, and is a professor of sociology at the Instituto de Altos Estudios, Universidad Nacional de San Martín. She is the author of Feminist International and Neoliberalism from Below, Popular Pragmatics and Baroque Economics. She is also co-author with Lucy Cavallero of A Feminist Reading of Debt. She is a feminist activist and member of the Ni Uno Menos collective. Our second panelist for the day is Dr. Supriya Garikipati, who is a reader in development economics at the University of Liverpool Management School, where she also teaches the subject. She is the co-director in the World Research Center and coordinates the Development Research Initiative, the RIPE Drive, a multidisciplinary knowledge platform at the Management School. She is also the research impact lead for the Management School. Her key research interest is in evaluating the interplay between economic policy and gender. Her work examines the impact of public policy interventions on the socioeconomic well-being of girls and women living in developing countries using an intersectional approach. From this perspective, she has done extensive work on the impact of financial inclusion on women, including debt-related vulnerabilities like debt bondage, women's reproductive health with focus on menstrual health, women's livelihood, and their labor market participation, including post-migration and unfree labor. Chairing this session today is Professor Vibhuti Patel. Professor Patel has superannuated from TIS, Mumbai in June 2020. She worked at Advanced Center for Women's Studies, School of Development Studies at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences for 3 years after her retirement from SNDT Women's University, Mumbai in 2017. Professor Patel is a PhD in economics from the University of Mumbai. She was awarded a visiting fellowship to the London School of Economics and Political Science from Association of Commonwealth Universities, UK, in 1992. She has co-authored and authored 12 books, edited and co-edited 9 books, and contributed over 100 papers as chapters in various books edited by authors. She has also co-authored and authored 34 research monographs and reports. Her research papers, comments, commentaries, and reviews have been published in the national as well as international academic journals. Welcome, Professor Patel, and thank you for being with us today. The session will begin with some initial questions to the speakers, followed by a Q&A with the audience. Please put your questions in the Q&A box throughout the session and upvote the ones you want to be asked, so it becomes easier for the chair to choose from. And without taking any more time, I will now hand over the discussion to Professor Patel.
Good evening, friends. First of all, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to Rethinking Economics India Network and coordinators of today's panel discussion, Juhi, Supriya, and Ananya, for giving me this opportunity to moderate this panel discussion with 2 renowned feminist economists and practitioners, Dr. Supriya Garikipati and Veronica Gago. I'm extremely honored to be part of this historically important panel discussion on gender, debt, and austerity, patriarchal foundation of capitalism. Experiences of last 30 years have shown that structural adjustment programs, stabilization policy triggered austerity measures that nation states of global south were forced to adopt have had a disproportionately negative short-term and long-term influence on women. In a short term, they reduce livelihood base of women, increase their unpaid work, and in the long term, reduction of social sector budgets and withdrawal of state from the welfare programs lead to immiserization and pauperization of mass of poor women and their families. In the pyramid of poverty, poor women are at the rock bottom. Uh, uh, all studies in the global south have revealed that women-headed households where main economic burden is shouldered by widows, separated, deserted, and divorced women happen to be the poorest of the poor. The capitalist patriarchy thrives on the wage theft of women workers who are most underprivileged ones. What we mean by wage theft is a denial of wages or employees' benefits rightfully owed to the employee, failing to pay overtime, violating minimum wage laws, misclassification of employees as independent contractors, as it happens in a gig economy where vulnerable individuals are projected as by giant multinational corporations, transnational corporation companies as independent contractors, illegal deduction in the pay, forcing employees to work off the clock, not paying annual leave, holiday entitlements, and simply not paying. Technology-enabled gig economy robs the workers from all grievance redressal mechanism the moment they are locked out of the system. Moreover, unpaid reproductive labor on a day-to-day basis and generational basis has been the core of gender inequality in capitalism in general and neoliberal capitalism in particular. Feminist economists have highlighted this consistently in national debate and also at an international level while raising the demand of reproductive infrastructure and support and payment for reproductive labor. Since 1980s, in the post-colonial countries which faced balance of payment crisis and also rising debt, have been pressurized to slash social sector budgets as a measure for economic stabilization by the Bretton Woods institutions like IMF and World Bank. Hence, we experienced that over last 30 years, state support for education, health, child and elderly care, skill building, employment programs have reduced drastically. Commodification of care has become a norm because the state has withdrawn from these services. The problem of social reproduction emerges as a key one. As a result, we have witnessed a relative devaluation of women's productive labor, an increase in a gender pay gap, both due to crisis itself and also due to austerity measures. And this where in country like India, where millions of women who work under integrated child development scheme or National Rural Health Mission, National Urban Health Mission, they are not even treated as workers. They are not even given the minimum wages stipulated by the state. They are only given honorarium and they are also treated as volunteer, though they are employed by the government. This devaluation also points to the fact that it is women whose payment for quote unquote productive labor mostly depends on legal minimum wage, which was frozen in several countries in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Though both working class men and women have been major victims of informalization of economy, and it is mostly women who work in the low paid sector and the low paid positions, who profits from this mounting debt crisis and feminization of labor. When we talk about feminization of labor, even men who are, because of the economic crisis, are forced to get into the service sector, they are also included. Working class men are also included. When millions are dying of hunger as they have no money or to buy food, COVID-19 as they have no money to buy health services, pandemic profiteers are minting billions of dollars. Current health emergency triggered slowing down of world economy and has negatively affected women 3 times more as compared to their male counterparts, as shown by so many micro level, meso level, and inter-country comparison rapid assessment studies done over last 1 year. On the one hand, women are the ones at the front line of care work. On the other, they absorb negative consequences of austerity measures of the neoliberal state governed by corporate capitalism that is extractive and predatory. Every crisis is perceived by TNCs and MNCs, transnational corporations and multinational corporations, as an opportunity for profiteering, as we saw after Second World War, how America amassed a lot of wealth out of Second World War, where all the European countries were ravished and emerged as a superpower, economic superpower. The nation states have scrapped welfare measures and facilitated market fundamentalism. Market, whether they are labor markets, factor markets, product markets, which are socially constructed and valorize intersectional inequalities of caste, class, race, ethnicity, religion, gender, which has exponentially increased the social inequality that has taken on a distinctly gender dimension. In this context, complete patriarchal control over women's sexuality, fertility, and labor serves the opportunistic requirement of capitalism that treats women workforce as precariat and auxiliary labor that can be hired and fired as per the whims and fancies of employers. And for that, the whole legal structure is also created by completely in the name of labor reforms. To achieve this, progressive labor, all progressive labors, laws, legislations, and even the ILO's covenants which nation state had signed, they are thrown in the dustbin. Transgender community facing stigma and social exclusion are not even considered as citizens in the economic planning or any macroeconomic measures that are taken. You may have one or two examples, like in India, Kerala, which and Tamil Nadu, these two states, they are now coming up with the gender responsive budgeting, keeping into consideration the needs and demands of the transgender community. But otherwise, the general norm is there that not to give them any citizenship rights. Relationship between market fundamentalism, militant nationalism, and toxic patriarchy is very important to focus on. Since the capitalism largely depends on free reproductive labor, it also often seeks ideological support in conservative, nationalistic, and patriarchal principles. Hence, one can notice the connection between effects of neoliberal economic policies and the process of repatriarchization, that repatriarchalization, which I think so many East European feminist economists have coined this term, such as glorification of traditional family values as men are bread earner, as men as bread earners and women as homemakers, gender division of labor, gender norms of subordination of women, and male domination in all spheres of economy and society, and at micro, meso, and macro levels. I think that is the one thing which we need to unpack. Thus, the dismantling of welfare state and increase in labor intensity by erosion of labor standards, abolition of right for collective bargaining with draconian labor codes, tempting and precarity in the name of flexibility and flexicurity, combination of labor market flexibility in a dynamic economy and the security of workers, with some of the northern countries they are discussing, but that is not implemented in the southern part of the globe. Unemployment and youth unemployment have been the marked features to consolidate gender hierarchy in a nation states of global south implementing the austerity agenda. Consequences of austerity measures are experienced in terms of collective frustration, stressful existence, fatigue, sense of despair, hopelessness, and social unrest. Fast-paced urbanization is not providing even basic subsistence needs to the migrant workers who are city makers. Without their labor, you just can't, urban economy would completely collapse. Then the perennial agrarian crisis in the poor countries facing imposition of harsh terms by World Trade Organization and General Agreement on Trade and Tariff has forced the rural poor to migrate to the cities and peri-urban centers. Women and young migrants face structural discrimination due to patriarchy, racial and generational inequalities. Capitalist exploitation of mostly female and underpaid reproductive labor of women is at the core of gender inequality. Feminist economists are committed to social justice and gender equality and believe that care activities need to be valorized and socially recognized, and paid care work be adequately rewarded and regularized as per the ILO norms of decent work. Demand of the day is to make global effort to combat policies of austerity and its social impact on exposing authoritarian neoliberal policies, structural gender hierarchies, caste, class, ethnicity, racial inequalities. Transnational solidarity among southern countries can challenge the anti-working class and anti-farmer nefarious policies of the ruling elite. Even if our national contexts are very different, such dialogues provide us an opportunity for cooperation around to provide an alternative economic vision against social and gendered consequences of austerity agenda. I congratulate Rethinking Economic Network to create such a platform for dialogue and the series of lectures that you have organized on gender and on gender and macroeconomy. They are among the pathfinders committed to gender justice, economic justice, social justice, and environmental justice. Today, we have Dr. Veronica Gago, Professor of Faculty of Social Sciences and University of Buenos Aires, and also Dr. Supriya Garikipati, Reader in Development Economics, University of Liverpool, for panel discussion. First of all, I would request Dr. Veronica Gago to make her presentation. Over to you, Dr. Veronica.
Thank you very much. Do I continue?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
It's well.
Well, first of all, good morning to everyone. Here is in Argentina, we are in the morning. It is a pleasure to be here in India, at least virtually. I wish I was there in the flesh, and I hope we can do it in some moment. I would like to share some elements of the research, a feminist reading of debt that I have done and we are still working on with Lucy Caballero here in Argentina. This is the title of our book, Reading Feminists of Debt, which will be published in a few days in English. So a proposal for this meeting is to work towards a further understanding of how the systems of patriarchy and capitalism end up reinforcing each other. And I would like to share what we understand as a feminist reading of debt. First, we consider that bringing together the issue of sexist violence and economic violence is a powerful interpretative key for the social and feminist movement. It is a way to connect machista violence, sexist violence, with economic violence, and in a very specific way with financial violence. In order to do that, we research household debt as a concrete device of massive impoverishment and as a tool to confine women in violent situations. In that sense, we propose to think of debt as a war against women's autonomy. So a feminist reading of debt enables us to understand how debt functions as a privileged device of new forms of exploitation, and how it is articulated with sexist violence. This research is unfolded in the horizon of the organizational process of the international feminist strikes since 2016. It's in that political process that we have been able to discuss finance in terms of conflict, and therefore in terms of self-defense of our autonomy. This is what allows us to produce the slogan, the statement, "We want ourselves alive, free, and debt-free," as a political statement. In that sense, we think that some contemporary feminist struggles and popular struggles are leading a movement of the politicization and collectivization of the issue of finance. What does debt mean in our countries in the global South, and especially in Latin America? First, it is essential to historize the link between public debt and the military dictatorship. In the 80s, debt disciplined the democratic transitions from dictatorship in Latin America. As our countries were forced to orient their economies toward repaying the debt taken out during authoritarian regimes. In the 90s, the Washington consensus of neoliberal reforms, of austerity reforms, pushed new threshold of debt, and today we are facing a forceful relaunching of financial colonization of our region, combined with increasingly intensive situations of poverty and dispossession of resources. In that sense, we talk about a financial extractivism, to combine the idea of financial dispossession with extractivism and neo-extractivism regimes. Understanding how debt organizes obedience at the level of the state also means rendering visible how it organizes daily life in each household. We use the formula borrowing it from the LGBTQI movement, taking debt out of the closet, taking debt out of the closet. It means narrating debt. It means conceptualizing debt in order to understand how it functions, to take each individual's debt, each household's debt, each family debt out of the closet. First, so we have to talk about it. We have to investigate how it is interwoven with different economies. It means also making visible how it extracts value from certain forms of life and how it intervenes in processes of production and reproduction of life. It means asking in which territories does it gain strength? What types of obedience does it produce? Taking it out of the closet means making debt visible and situate debt as a common problem. De-individualized debt for us is a political target, because taking debt out of the closet involves challenging its power to shame and guilt and its power to function as a private issue, which we can only face by managing our accounts alone. For us also is very important the link between debt and labor. A feminist reading of debt implies highlight the differential of exploitation that is created when the indebted, those who spend all day managing accounts, are women, housewives, female heads of households, informal workers, popular economy workers, sex workers, migrant inhabitants of the slums, Black and indigenous women, travestis, peasants, or students. I think that both moves, visibilizing debt and showing its sexual and gender difference, are ways of removing its power of abstraction. Both moves also are inscribed within a geopolitics. The subjectivity of an indebted North American private university student is not the same as that of a subsidized worker in a cooperative, for example, in the migrant neighborhood of Flores in Buenos Aires. Rather than postulate an universal subjectivity of debtor-creditor relation, gender difference and colonial difference operates differently in regards to debt. I think that this is due to several reasons, since that difference suppose, one, a particular form of moralization directed toward women and feminized bodies. Two, a differential of exploitation due to the corresponding relations of subordination. Three, and a specific relation between debt and reproductive labor. 4, the concrete impact of sexist violence to which debt is connected. And 5, fundamental variations in possibilities for the future involving financial obligation in the case of feminized bodies. So debt functions by structuring a compulsion to accept any kind of labor. So this is the obligation related to the obligation in the future. In this sense, it drives precarization from within. That puts in practice the exploitation of creativity at any price. It does not matter what work you do. All that matters is repaying your debt. So this is also a very important question related to, for example, illegal economies. No? The precarious, informal, and even illegal dynamics of jobs or different forms of income is revealed to be increasingly discontinuous, while debt operates as a stable continuum that exploits that multiplicity and heterogeneity of labor. Debt is a way of managing the crisis. Nothing, I think this is also a very important issue, how debt is a way of a political management of the crisis. Nothing explodes, but everything implodes in words, in families, in households, in workplaces, in neighborhoods. Financial obligation makes relationships become increasingly fragile and precarious due to the permanent pressure of debt. The structure of mass indebtedness that has existed for over a decade is what gives us clue to the current form taken by the crisis as an individual responsibility, as a familiar responsibility, as an increase in so-called domestic violence, as a greater precarization of existence. On the other hand, we want also to highlight the possibility of disobedience. How can we disobey debt? And in particular, the practical forms of struggles that are being pushed by the feminist and popular movement. For example, reclaiming public services, reclaiming more wages, reclaiming everything against austerity measures, and especially against the IMF external debt that is in our region the greater of our history today. Taking debt out of the closet is a political move against guilt, against the abstraction exercised by the domination of finance, and against the moral argument that women are good payers, which is used everywhere to legitimize targeting feminized bodies as the favored responsible subject of financial obligation. It is necessary to produce and expand a feminist pedagogy against debt. I think that this is also a political task that we share, a feminist pedagogy against debt. Analyze the process of debt, landing in specific conflicts and in very different territories. That enables us to confront debt in concrete situation against the idea of an abstract finance that we do not know how to confront it. So finally, a feminist reading of debt proposes concrete bodies and narratives of its operation in opposition to financial abstraction. A feminist reading of debt involves detecting how debt is linked to violence against women, lesbian, trans, and travestis. A feminist reading of debt maps and analyzes forms of work in a feminist register, render invisible domestic reproductive and community labor as spaces of valorization, as strategic political spaces that finance sets out to exploit. And just to finish, I would like to add that during the first year of the pandemic, we were researching the rise of new debts. So one of the lines of our current investigation that has emerged has to do with analyzing the new debts in the pandemic. In Argentina, many people, for example, have gone into debt to pay cell phones bills, used to access to internet for children's schoolwork, for example. Here, not everyone has Wi-Fi or a computer, and in general, during the pandemic, schoolwork is accessed through a cell phone. That means paying for extra data for connectivity to dollarize corporations that charge very high rates for connection. Women, besides having to do more and more reproductive work and work of schooling in the household, end up taking out even more debt to be able to fulfill this task. So we have more reproductive labor and more debt in the midst of the pandemic. So I think that this is very important for us to build this kind of shared analysis and these political networks to think together and to act against austerity measures in these very different scales. Many thanks.
Excellent, Dr. Veronica Gago, for making such a powerful exposition of the debt and deconstructing the debt in the Latin American context. I would like to ask that, can we understand debt without the historical genesis of debt in slavery and colonization? What are your views? And secondly, when we talk about extractivist and predatory nature of financial institutions, in India, a lot of documentation has happened. How has it happened in your Latin American context?
Yeah. Repeat?
Yes. First one is that, can we understand the like unending burden of debt without historical genesis of debt in colonization and slavery? Yeah.
Yes, I think that is, of course, a very central issue, and especially, for example, we have to rethink all the time in this term of colonization of social reproduction, not in metaphorical terms. It is really the violent process of everyday colonization of different, for example, lands, in terms of against the peasant movement, the indigenous movement, and also how this colonization process is renewed every day in terms of privatization, in terms of neo-extractivism and its different mega projects of extractivism, but also in terms of financial colonization, how reproductive labor and how our everyday life is progressively colonized by these financial devices, as, for example, household debt. So all the time we are using and taking into account this historical frame to rethink the concrete operation of debt as a device of colonization, but also to connect finance with other process of colonization, for example, in terms of the corporations related to food, for example, the colonization and the privatization of public services, but also the corporations selling indigenous or communitarian lands. And I think that all these different elements, we have to analyze it together to have a complete picture of what we are saying when we talk about colonization as a historical process, but also as a very present moment of our crisis. And I would like to add that the situation with the IMF in our region, and especially in our country, in Argentina, now we have the biggest debt, external debt in our history, and it has to do with a lot of different attempts to labor reforms, pensions reforms, and also privatizations of public services. So I think that we have to produce all this systematic analysis to rethink our regions in terms of global south.
Can you throw light on migration crisis and its relationship with the macroeconomic policies on that? Migration, the predicament of migration.
Yes, well, it's a very complicated situation, not especially in Argentina, but yes, in other countries of our regions. The more dramatic situations is in Venezuela in that moment. So I think that different comrades from Venezuela could talk about it more specifically, but I think that, of course, the pandemic crisis and also this massive impoverishment in our regions has to do with, of course, the so-called migration crisis. And well, it's the main labor force of our popular economies. The migrant labor forces, I think the political subject of our popular economies, but also its very important presence in different kind of popular movement, and especially in feminist movement. I think that for example, the presence of domestic labor is protagonized by migrant I think internal migrants within the region, but also Latin American migrants that want to work in Europe, for example.
Thank you. Now we move to Dr. Supriya. Can you make your presentation? Yeah. After that, we'll have Q&A.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Vibhuti. Before I get into my presentation, may I just say it's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be part of this panel. So thank you so much. Well, I would like to talk something really quite different from Veronica. So it's actually quite good to have such two complementary talks, perhaps. Now, what I'd like to do is building on my work in the area of microfinance and the impact of financial inclusion on women, I want to draw some insights on how debt-related vulnerabilities play a role in women's agency and empowerment, especially in the context of India. Right. Now, see, by now, it is really quite well established that microfinance, or in its new avatar of financial inclusion, capitalist market-based credit solutions are really not a silver bullet for either poverty alleviation or for the promotion of women's agency. Indeed, it is not to say that no one benefits, but that not all do, which also means that some do benefit. In fact, to garner any meaningful insights into how debt links with agency, it is actually quite worth following women who have benefited from microfinance. So those who have made the journey from financial inclusion to empowerment. And this is precisely what I do in a forthcoming paper. And what I'm hoping to do today is to share some of the insights from this work here today. The work, of course, is extensive. It is based on survey of many years, periodic surveys, repeated surveys. I would like to just talk about some of the insights that we have gathered. Now, if I could just share the presentation, that might make things a bit more interesting to people rather than just having to stare at me. Sorry, I'm just going to go to the. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
That's great. So essentially, the title of the paper is From Financial Inclusion to Empowerment. And we are in this paper, like I said, following women who make it. And I think there are really important insights to be had from women who make it. Now, it's actually useful to set this research in the wider context of the microfinance literature. If you recall the early literature in microfinance, it was heavily polarized. There were a group of people who had found positive outcomes, but there were also almost an equally strong group of people who had found negative outcomes. More recently, there has been an emerging consensus. And if we are to sort of use a single line in order to describe what this consensus is, then this is to say that microfinance is not a magic bullet. It does not in itself resolve poverty. It does not in itself empower women. Now, there are, of course, several strands to this literature, and some of these strands I have highlighted here for you. But of these strands, I would like to highlight one. And that is to say, that is the strand of loan use matters. In much of my previous work, I have made this point a few times that it is loan use, how microfinance clients use their loans as opposed to loan procurement alone that actually matters. We find, especially in India, that microfinance loans are highly fungible within the household. Roughly around 80% of the loans that have been given to women are used by the household. It is only in a very small minority of the cases, roughly around 20% of the cases, the percentage differs depending on where you do the survey in India, where the data comes from, but it is around about 20%, between 15 to 20% of women get to use their loans in such a way that challenges the patriarchal norms around their income and their time use. And it is following these women that provides some interesting insights. So really, it's the middle bit that I'm going to focus on. However, I must point out that there are other interesting strands of this literature for someone to pursue. Now, the data that we use, it comes from periodic surveys. The very first survey was done in 2002, 2003. And after that, we did several follow-up rounds of survey, the last one being in 2019. We were supposed to go back this year, but it doesn't look like it. And the data comes from Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. And of course, it's from SHGs, which is India's biggest microfinance provider. Now, I'm going to provide a couple of illustrations to make my point about why loan use is so important. Now, in this table, you will find the relationship between loan use and repayment. There are 4 different loan uses right on the top there, if you can look at it. And then there are 4 different sources from where women are able to make the repayments. Now, what's immediately clear when you look at this table is that it is those women who are able to use the loans in a way that challenges patriarchal norms are the ones who are best off. They are the ones who are able to also make repayments from this source. Whereas these other women who have unfortunately not been able to challenge the patriarchal corralling of their credit, lose control over their loans, and they are pushed into the labor market where they are working in fairly bad conditions and for very low wages in order to make repayment from their wages. The reason why this is happening is that women are denied co-ownership in households' reproductive assets. And really, women's debt is going into creating male assets. So what we see is a bifurcation. Men are turning into asset owners and women are turning into debt owners. We also see a similar pattern when we analyze the relationship between loan use and time use. Once again, that pattern is supported and strengthened. We find that women who use loans on their own businesses, or not on family stuff like family businesses or family consumption, find that they are able to improve the value of their time use. They are able to use their time on asset work as opposed to wage work or being unemployed, right? So here again, the importance of loan use as opposed to loan procurement is established. So really, this gives us our research questions. Obviously, it is these women who have been able to use their loans in this way that are of interest to us. So the questions that we ask is that, who are these women? Why are their experiences so different from others? What separates these experiences and what insights can be sort of received from their experiences, both for policy, but also for research? So those are the questions. And obviously, when we ask how different are these women, remember that we are only able to answer this in the observables. The unobservables are not obviously observed by us, and therefore we are unable to comment. So, you know, there might be something else happening there, which we really can't talk about. I find that some participant has raised a question. I'm happy to take questions in the middle of the presentation. Does someone want to read out the question to me, please? Or shall I carry on? Okay, I'm going to carry on. Now, the question that we are asking is, what determines loan use? In other words, how different are these women? What makes them stand out? So there are a couple of things that stand out. I mean, these women are clearly more educated. By the way, we have done a regression analysis here. The results that you see on the screen here are logit estimation of the determinants of loan use. For students of economics who are also students of econometrics, this is probably easy enough to read. But for those of you who are not into econometrics, the way to understand these figures is that you're trying to understand what determines a dependent variable. The dependent variable is loan use. And here we are trying to understand what makes women use their loan on own managed businesses as opposed to giving it to their family. And here we are asking the question, is it women's age that matters? Is it women's education that matters? Does it matter as to whether women come from a wealthy household or not? And so on. So we are understanding the impact or the effect all these factors have on determining how women use their loans. So now let's just focus on the one variable that I want to talk to you about today, and that is to look at peers' loan use. So I've highlighted that in red, and here immediately what's visible is that this is an important variable. What the statistics on this variable are telling us is that women are likely to be highly influenced by what other members of their credit group are doing. So if other members are using their loan on businesses, then women are more likely to use their loans on businesses. And this is a really important variable, which means that there is some strength in numbers. Women are likely to imitate other members of their group. And I think that's really where solidarity comes from. That's really where group lending, the importance of group lending comes from. Now, just focusing on that variable of peers' loan use, we find in our sample of roughly around 377 households, we find 82 women are able to use their loans on own businesses. The rest of them end up giving their loans to their family. Now, these women do different things. Some women have individual businesses. Most women, in fact, had individual businesses. But some, interestingly, had cluster businesses. This is when about 1/3 of the group, or 5 members of the group, came together and started a venture. But in some cases, almost the entire group came together, pooled their loans, and started a business. And what we found when we kept going back to do periodic repeated surveys is that the probability of cluster businesses and joint ventures, which we club under group businesses, survive. The probability of these businesses surviving is much higher. So the next table gives you an idea of how businesses have survived over 10 years. In fact, it's a bit longer than 10 years, but I've just said 10 for the sake of rounding it off. Now, here is the status in 2005, and this is the status in 2017. What is pretty clear is individual businesses have not had an easy ride. They don't survive mainly because amount of loan is really tiny, and what you can do with tiny loans is really limited, and there is already saturation in the market, and therefore you struggle. There are lots of reasons why women get into joint or cluster group businesses. Some are pragmatic reasons. They are pooling their resources and they're providing complementary skills. But there are also ideological reasons, and this is where things start getting interesting. And mainly, this is to resist the patriarchal corralling of resources. So I am giving my loan to my leader, to the leader of the group already, as soon as I get it, because I trust her, I know her, rather than take it home, because I'm afraid that my husband is going to beat me and take the loan out of my hands. So in order to resist the patriarchal corralling of resources, women actually seem to be getting into joint businesses and cluster businesses. And what is truly exciting about this is not only that these businesses make profits, but actually the patriarchal dividends of collective strategies. We find that women, and this is what's quite interesting for the empowerment debate. So both within the household and outside the household, people who do businesses together provide support to other members of the household. They are better incentivized social connectivity, and that percolates into various aspects of domestic life, especially in terms of lowering domestic violence and reducing vulnerability to crisis. These women also provide support to each other outside the household, so in the wider societal context. Especially, they enhance women's ability to challenge patriarchal norms, enhancing the ability in other spheres. For instance, because you're able to challenge the norm at a collective level, the norm gets changed. Now, evidence also suggests that women working together using collective strategies to influence their individual agency and empowerment is more widespread. There are other examples in India. For instance, Lijjat, Seva, and Kudumbashri are some of the big examples that stand out. Now, here are simply some quotations from our study, which uses also a qualitative survey. The first quotation is to talk about, where the lady talks about how members of her group business have actually ensured that there is no domestic violence in her household, simply because her husband has taken notice of her changing status externally. Groups also support each other in averting small crises, and we have evidence to suggest this. Groups also seem to be supporting each other for bargaining better wages, because these women will definitely go out and work in high agricultural seasons because wages are really quite high during those seasons. But attitudes are also changing in the wider context, and we found evidence to suggest that women's presence in the market is more accepted now because they are collectively doing this. They are in the bazaar together with their group members, carrying out their business, and this makes it more acceptable. The other norm that we found changing in the village is women returning late, because the understanding is that women are doing a business together and they are working late rather than having fun or enjoying themselves. And therefore, families are more acceptable of this shift in a patriarchal norm, which did not allow women to stay outside after sunset. Now, this is really the point that I want to leave you with. And if I'm running out of time, I can probably end this as my last slide. You see, empowerment in the literature is mainly viewed as a single person's achievement. So the linear connection between getting credit, getting microfinance loan, and starting your business, contributing to household income, and then having a greater say in household decision making. That kind of a linear model has been used by the proponents of microfinance to suggest that women's empowerment or enhancement of her agency is going to be the outcome of microfinance. But actually, this is possibly not an individual's achievement. The collective achievements of credit groups are not very well understood. The evidence from our work seems to suggest that women are using collective bargaining to empower themselves as individuals. Collective and individual bargaining may be much more intertwined than we have previously understood. And certainly we seem to have enough evidence in our work to suggest this. The two specific examples that stand out are the averting of domestic violence and that of small crises within the households. I'm going to stop here now. I have a couple more slides, but I can see people are asking questions and raising hands. So let me just stop and sort of open it up to a discussion around this idea. So really, the final point that I wanted to make is that literature and also policy needs to move away from the idea that agency or empowerment is somehow an individual women's achievement. Really, it's the group bargaining that is important, and that's where the work needs to shift. I'll stop talking there.
You're muted, Professor Vibhuti.
Yeah. So am I audible? No. Okay. Hello. So the Supriya, very impressive presentation, but I would like my question later. First question, which is to, I think, Veronica. What is the structural framework that leads to debt affecting men and women differently? Veronica, yeah.
Yes, I talk about differences in terms of gender in the gender relations and how this affects the power relations in terms of labor market, but also in terms of access to different resources. So I think that when we talk about a feminist reading of debt, we are talking about how we highlight these structural differences in terms of how this affects with this differential of exploitation in terms of women and LGBTQI people in relation to men. No? And I think that this is the general framework that allows us to emphasize these differences in terms of especially exploitation, access to rights and public services, and also in terms of reproductive labor.
Yeah. So second question is to me about the term repatriarchization, which the East European feminists have used. I think that is in the context of changes that have come after collapse of Soviet Union, because that earlier, like the state was providing all the support, like socialization of function of family was a motto of the Soviet society, where the state provided childcare facilities. It encouraged women, like participation in the social production was considered to be the major sign of progress. But after the dismantling of Soviet Union, as well as more and more marketization of care services, and also glorification and valorization of motherhood in this, because they are the pro-natalist society. So women are asked, in fact, a feminist friend from Romania, she said that the new abortion laws in those countries, where earlier abortion was treated as a safe method, affordable, and on demand by women, it was provided as a backup services. Now, most of these countries have withdrawn that because they want women to produce more babies. At the same time, state doesn't want to do any facilitating role to these mothers. That means they become, so housewifeization becomes the norm. And then there is a precarious economic condition and austerity. So in this context, they say that the repatriarchization, because the patriarchal control over women's sexuality, fertility, and labor increases when you are economically disempowered, and the state also doesn't pitch in. No. So the third question is to, again to Veronica, what is the structural framework that leads to debt affecting men and women differently?
This is the same that we have already commented.
Yeah, commented. Yes, you have. Yes. Now to Supriya, what role the caste location is playing in debt availability and utilization?
Caste.
Yeah.
Have I heard you right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, caste is actually really an important player. What we find in some of the villages is that microfinance is actually being used to create another class system, right? Because even the access to microfinance, it's actually used as a power mechanism. I mean, it sort of creates its own power dynamics. Access to microfinance obviously depends on your caste, how quickly you're able to access microfinance, how quickly you're able to come to a group into a group together, because groups are self-selecting, and obviously women who are of the lower caste either lack awareness, are not in the right meetings, are not in the right time at the right place, are not able to talk to the bank officials and the NGOs and so on. And typically, even if lower caste women come together, they seem to have a leader who is not from their caste and therefore keeps them out of the actual sort of progressive loans or so on. So in some sense, we have found a power hierarchy developing and microfinance itself being used as a stick to beat up further and further sort of build on this caste-based hierarchy that we already find in the rural countryside mainly, but also elsewhere. So in some sense, microfinance has not been able to challenge the caste hierarchy in India. And unfortunately, it has served to emphasize this caste divide that exists. So yes, the inadvertent consequences of microfinance have been that caste line has deepened across the Indian countryside.
So the next question is also once again to you. What are the ways that women from rural areas of India can empower? I think you gave some examples, but still, if you want to give some more case studies. Yeah.
I mean, this is a very deep question. And I think, there's a lot of debate about this in the literature, as I said. What we have found that works and what other people have found that works is that microfinance clearly is not for everybody, right? And microfinance works, but it works in certain contexts. And I think, first of all, that needs to be understood by the sector. So this crazy kind of idea to include everybody financially. I mean, financial inclusion is, of course, a different thing, but to expect that market-based credit is actually going to solve the problems of poverty and solve the problems of women's empowerment is kind of foolish. We have to accept that microfinance is not the answer, that it does work, but only in some cases. So that's really point number one. Point number two is that even extremely poor women, even marginalized women, seem to be able to sort of leverage credit in order to experience better agency via collective strategies. So what women cannot achieve as individuals, they are better able to achieve by using collective strategies. And this we have seen time and again, not only in the area of microfinance, but in other areas. For instance, Seva, the kind of work that Seva has done, the kind of work that Kutumbashri in Kerala is doing. These are examples that have time and again given us the important role of collective strategy. Remember, I mean, right from the Chipko movement, right, to the liquor, to the
liquor movement.
yeah, to liquor banning in the South, every movement, women have challenged patriarchal norms, but the reason why they have been successful is because they have adopted collective strategies. So I think there are these broad ideas that we can sort of take insights from, and I would call them insights from the literature. One is that microfinance is not a panacea, it does not work for everybody. And the second is that perhaps extremely poor women, for them, collective strategies need to consider. And another sort of intervention that's really quite interesting is the intervention by BRAC, where they don't actually give women credit, but they identify women who don't have the capacity to absorb credit. So rather than trap these women in, create a debt trap for these women, they actually give them grants in kind. So these women's capacity for credit is developed, and only then they are given credit. And that's a very interesting idea for extremely poor groups of women. And I'm surprised that more experimentation with this type of idea hasn't been seen in other countries. Of course, Bangladesh's experiment with vulnerable groups of loanees, especially women, has been really successful, but this needs further experimentation in other countries, definitely.
Thank you.
I want to ask or to comment something to Supriya.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting how are you arguing that finance are not for everyone, but can we agree that the self-discourse of financial is that they are the solution for everybody? They promote sort of programs that says financial for all, inclusions for all. So the self-discourse of microcredits, it's like a totally solution for everybody. So I think this is the first point to think about in terms of what are you think researching. The second one is how we confront or challenge this individual framework of microcredit that has to do with the entrepreneurial of the self or the self management of our poverty that microfinance also want to promote. So how these collective projects of economic clusters or projects also challenge the subjective figure of microfinance as an individual entrepreneurial of the self as the ideal subjectivity of microcredit. And the third one that I would like to ask you is how we think in this pragmatic and productive use of microcredit in terms of collective projects, in the context of aggressive impoverishment of our regions. These are my 3.2.
Yeah. I would like a rejoinder with what Veronica said in terms of that. You gave 3 examples of like Lijjat Papad, Kutumbashri, and Seva. Now, political economy of the structures of all these 3 models are very different, because Lijjat Papad purely profit. We have like we at a grassroots level, like we feminists in the 80s and 90s also, we had taken up this issue where women like they take the undertaking from the women that I treat Lijjat Papad as a temple. You always offer something to the god. You don't take anything to the god. So using this kind of a religious sentiments for super exploitation, giving them piece rate wages, no occupational health and safety. You see the workshop, only the international, that when development tourism takes place, people are taken to the headquarters. And it's a purely upper class and elite women managing global business of papad for profit. I would see it that way. Seva model, where the cooperative model, because we know that the kind of anguish that Ilaben went through, and with the Gandhian concept of and collectivity, because it has both. It has a trade union element, fighting against injustice and demanding more space for women, and at the same time collective endeavor and social reform agenda also it has of empowering women through, because they keep in touch with the women's movement strongly and always take stand. They take side when it comes to choosing between the status quo and neoliberalism and women. They always choose. We have seen during 1993 riots, 2002 riots, how they protected women from the marginalized community. Third model of Kutumbashri, where the state is very proactively supporting, because in Kerala, 40% of the state budget is for social sector. And that helps, and 10% of it is only for women empowerment. And the support that comes from the government, the state, and civil society, GOs and NGOs working together, that gives long-term stability to Kutumbashri. And the resources which Kutumbashri has, you visit any SHG anywhere in the world, and you will visit Kutumbashri in Kerala, they have such a huge infrastructure. They have very extremely sound and robust foundation on which they can sustain any kind of a major crisis, whether it's a floods in Kerala or it is COVID-19. The efficiency with which Kerala combated Corona is mainly because of the network of Kutumbashri. So I think we need to differentiate this kind of what provides the basis, no? Because SHGs, we have known even SHGs which are giving loan for sex selective abortion. There are SHGs who are also giving loan for dowry for this thing. So the ideological underpinning with which SHGs are run also become very important. So okay, now I think you can answer the question. So,
I think this is a really big task. And what I'm simply going to say is that I agree fully with both of you. The scope of my work is really rather limited in that sense. So, yes, you are quite right, Veronica. I was trying to make a note of all the 3 questions that you had. I don't think I was very successful at doing that. But this whole idea about ideologically, where do we see microfinance fit in? How right is it to sort of go after financial inclusion, not only as a normative idea, but actually as, an idea that's going to impact on people's life? I would tend to agree with you that it is madness indeed to do this. I think it's we need to deconstruct this notion. There are sort of advantages to financial inclusion. And you can imagine that financial inclusion does not only mean credit, but it actually means having a bank account, having an identity. And this might be a stepping stone to further sort of welfare measures that the state wants to take. Actually, in India, as in other LDCs, other developing countries, we do have a lot of leakages in welfare schemes, right? And one of the things that can stop these leakages is if everybody is financially included. So if I want to sort of, make sure that over 65s have sort of some standard income, then I know that these are the accounts of the over 65s. All of them are included. So I can just simply do a bank transfer to these accounts without having the worry. So financial inclusion in that sense could be a state policy. as a stepping stone to other welfare measures. So in that sense, I think there is some debate to be had over there.
Yeah.
What was your second question? Sorry, my notes haven't kept up with me. This is to do with the construction of individual as an entrepreneur.
Yes, entrepreneur.
Yeah, I mean, that again, I totally agree. We found the idea of individual entrepreneurs like expecting everybody to be able to succeed in that linear journey from taking the loan to actually empowering themselves via improving their ability to earn an independent income. That is just too much of a burden on an individual. And after all, who wants to be an entrepreneur? It's such an uncertain life, so much of uncertainty. I'd rather have a job. So, job creation in these areas is also something that's important. So in some sense, microfinance is a way of washing your hands of the responsibility of creating jobs and furthering the economy through that. So, you're saying that, oh, these people can all go and be self-employed, but look at their ability to generate a profit. Look at the issue of debt trap. So, there are all these issues of course, and these are important to talk about. Now, finally, I mean, I'd just like to say very quickly, quick response to Vibhuti's points. Yes, totally. These are completely different structures, very, very different organizations, and putting them on the same platform is probably inappropriate. Now, my work is not to comment on these organizations. I am only looking at where collective strategies have actually helped further women's livelihoods and agency. And these examples obviously stand out as, superior to some of the other efforts that have happened. And indeed, your final point about Kutumbashri is really worth considering, isn't it? I mean, why haven't other states used this idea? It seems that Kerala has been quite sort of a pioneer in understanding how important collective strategies are and in using this idea for its marginalized population and making a success out of it. The kind of state backing that Kutumbashri enjoys, why don't we see similar state initiatives in other states? So I think really your question itself begets another question. And it's an important one to ask.
There are two very important questions, one by Dr. Professor Mrudul Ippen, who is the Planning Board of Kerala. She says, fascinating presentation of Supriya. How does group solidarity ensure sustainability for the enterprise, especially in terms of marketing? And another question by head of Seva in Kerala, Nalini Nayak, it is about for the groups that survived, how many loans did they continue to take from how many microfinance companies?
Okay, sorry, could I just have one question at a time?
Okay, so first I think Dr.
Notes, but it is difficult.
First one is by Dr.
So fantastic to hear from Mrudulapan ma'am. She was my teacher at CDS. So really great to hear back from you. It's so good to follow your career as well. What was the question? Sorry.
It is about that, how do they manage the markets, no?
Yes, that's a really interesting question, in fact. Now, what we find is that women actually come together, those who do, come together in order to not only pool their small loans to make a bigger sort of amount, but they also have very complementary skills. So generally a group is heterogeneous. You find some women are leaders, go-getters, good at bargaining, good at talking, but you also have the weaker members of the group who are more willing to let others take the sort of leadership and make the decisions, but they are willing to give their time and do the jobs that are allocated to them. So really, sort of coming together, pooling their resources is also done because they have complementary skills. We find that women are much more sort of happier to go to the market and to have a stall in the market together rather than individually. So there's one business, a fertilizer business that I can use an example as, where women have collectively started a fertilizer business. So if it was an individual woman who was doing this, she would have had to ask her husband to accompany her to go to the wholesale market and buy fertilizers. But now they just get together as a group. Someone has a tractor, someone's son is driving the tractor, 3 or 4 women go together, those who are good at bargaining and those who have some knowledge about fertilizer. So there is a lot of pooling of complementary skills, there's pooling of resources, and there's also sharing of time. That's really important. So, the fertilizer business, there's always someone in that shop because women are allocating jobs between themselves because they are in this group business together.
Yeah. Now, can Veronica, you take this question from Dr. Varsha Malwade from Bombay University, where she says that have women paid heavy price in Corona? And there are several other questions also related to public debt and COVID-19. I think many of you have already taken care of. Ashmita Bhattacharya also is asked that there seems to be a nascent movement trying to endorse more maternal gift economy concept as a counter to capitalism and the exchange economy. Any thoughts on if there is any hope to make this come alive and change the economic structure? So these 2 questions you can take. There are several questions, so we can take up later. Yeah.
Well, maybe just a couple of things about the Corona crisis and indebtedness and the gender role of this indebtedness. As I were saying before, we have been researching how this emergence of the health and housing crisis, for example, is related to new debts, for example, in terms of access to houses. And we had a lot of new rental debts, for example, in the crisis, but also debts related to health emergency. So we are, and also I was talking about the debt related to phone cells to accomplish homeschooling, for example. So we are mapping these new debts that are emerging in the crisis, and we can say that all these new debts are related to, on one hand, a structural dispossession of public services, and on the other hand, new task of reproductive labor related to the Corona crisis. So we have this double line of structural dispossession of public services and new forms of reproductive labor in the crisis. So I think this is like a double coin that is all the time producing new forms of indebtedness, and especially related to feminized labor and migrant labor. And also, I think that is, we have this discussion, and I see a question related to that, about how indebtedness take advantage of gender roles or family values, or as you said, Patel, the repatriarchalization of the responsibility of families, but also communities, and also poor neighborhoods. So I think that this idea of how indebtedness is more and more tied to gender roles, and this family responsibility is also a very important issue, because the feminist movement is producing politics against this idea of gender mandates. And so we are now with this idea of stay at home or stay at your neighborhood. And this is also a repatriarchalization of women in their spaces, in their neighborhoods, in their communities. So we are all the time discussing this mobilization of the feminist movement against these gender mandates, and now the crisis as a reorganization of these gender mandates.
Now there is a question about, again, Veronica, for you, that how do we understand persistent indebtedness of households and debt forgiveness, quote unquote, for firms? Because that has happened, because there are so many financial scams have taken place, and the ruling elite has protected their interests, and the role of the state in global south.
Yes, I think this is the scandal, the forgiveness of debt for firms, for different corporations, and also the different support of that these multinational corporations have been receiving from our states, and how we have to fight for the forgiveness of our debt in terms of personal, but also in terms of a national debt. So I think that we have to dispute this idea of forgiveness, or I like more cancellation of debt. Yeah. We have different campaigns against debt, reclaiming cancellation of debt in terms of personal household debt, but also external debt, reclaiming that the debt is not legitimate, it is not fair, it is related to dictatorship, it is related with neoliberal governments, and well, of course, it has also a lot of formal problems that allows us to declare not valid. But of course, we know that is a forced relation related to that. And for example, nowadays in Argentina, one of the demands of the IMF is not to allow a new social subsidy for the poorest families in the crisis. Yeah. This is one of the requirements of the IMF, not allowed to the government to allow this new social subsidy for the emergency situation.
Yeah, thank you. Now to Dr. Supriya, there is a question that how can women collectivize beyond the clutches of caste and religion?
Yes, I mean, what happens is that microfinance groups are typically voluntarily formed. And we find that groups are more or less homogeneous in terms of the observable characteristics. So both in terms of religion, community. So if you have people from a Muslim background, you will find that the group is mainly Muslim, or vice versa. Also caste. There is heterogeneity in unobservable characteristics. For instance, someone might be articulate, someone might be a leader, someone might be better at accounting, someone might be better at bargaining. And so the skills are complementary. But in terms of the observables, and religion, like you said, or caste is one of those observables, women do tend to form homogeneous groups. And it's easier for people of a homogeneous background to start something collective, simply because trust is an extremely important ingredient in anything that's happening at the collective level. We started asking ourselves this question sort of soon into the work around 2010, when it became apparent to us that collective strategies were having an advantage. We started asking why all groups did not choose collective strategies. And at that time, it became obvious to us that social ties and trust among members of the same group actually plays a very big role. And a lot of groups, women simply do not trust other members of their group, and therefore they do not choose to have collective strategies. Then again, we need to really use the findings that we have with a big pinch of salt. We have already understood that microfinance, financial inclusion is not for everybody, but it's also important to understand that collective strategies are not for everybody. So these are solutions, but they are always limited solutions.
So thank you. Next three questions are also to you. One is from Mustafa Ozer, and he asked that, have you controlled the effect of peers loan use across age and education level of women? Should I say the second one or afterwards?
Yeah, very simply, very quickly, I'm also looking at the time. Yes, we have controlled age and other observable characteristics. We have not controlled for unobservables, but we have control for endogeneity bias by just looking at 1 year when all of them joined the microfinance group. But these are sort of technical issues. And I guess I'm very happy for him to write an email to me, and I can clarify exactly our estimation strategy.
Padmini Ramesh asks that often self-help group members come under pressure from MFIs to extract payment from defaulting members, or else they may have to pay up on behalf of the defaulters. Income poor women are thus pitted against each other in actual practice of loan recovery. In the process, MFIs effectively use women's sense of shame and the social vulnerability as their collateral. What are your views on this?
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree. I mean, one of the big things about the group lending joint liability mechanism is to replace your asset collateral with social collateral. And what the banks have done is they have delegated the job of screening and monitoring from themselves to poor women. And in doing that, they have also shifted the burden of screening, monitoring, and enforcing on these poor women. So the outcomes are going to be burdensome for them. But you have to also look at the flip side of the coin. These were unbankable individuals. They would not be able to access credit as individuals. And therefore, the only way for them to be able to have access to credit was via a group lending mechanism. Now, of course, the debate is rife as to whether credit itself is a solution, and I don't buy that it is a solution for everybody. And that is something that I really like to underline many times, that it is not a solution. And certainly I agree that group lending does put a huge amount of burden on the borrowers.
Correct. Mayur Kamble from TISS, who has worked on SHGs of Dalit women in rural Maharashtra, he asked that what is the role of government to understand problems arising in rural microfinance India in the post-COVID era? Which are the...
Yeah, I mean, post-COVID era has really taken a beating, isn't it? And India has really suffered because although it's been a leader with financial inclusion and with microfinance first and then financial inclusion, it has actually not been able to, it's sort of fallen way behind Africa and Latin America in digitizing financial inclusion. So that is where I think the future lies. And of course, state is doing something about it. We know that NABARD is very interested in this policy of e-Shakti, where it is digitizing all the SHGs. So perhaps this is a temporary slack and we will see things improve, but certainly digitization is looking like the future.
Yeah, and how successful is the Social Security Act 2008 as a result of Arjun Sengupta committee report's recommendation that India had? I can take that question, and I can say that not only that it is not only successful, there is nothing, we have got a very draconian 4 labor codes, which are taking away whatever little which Indian working class had managed to have in last 150 years in terms of 48 labor legislations and 200 state-specific legislations, and everything has been wiped out. And also with informalization of economy, in any case, it was helpful only for 6% of the organized labor force. 94% of the workforce had to face law of jungle. So I think that is the status, and a lot of churning has been happening, not only by the trade unions alone, but by the human rights organizations, civil society organizations, and also organizations like Oxfam and other international NGOs who are, and labor, ILO has also intervened to see to it that labor laws are not taken away. Now, what are some of the gaps in formalizing collective strategies within India and Global South? Veronica, would you like to take this question? And also the gig economy. There is a question about gig economy. What are the women's predicament in the gig economy and future of work?
I don't know which are the gaps. I think that we have to research and do comparative, maybe research to think about it. I think that it is the question how we combine these structural approaches to microcredit and finance and these neoliberal policies in a wide sense, and at the same time, how we pay attention to the different collective strategies to organize the everyday life and the everyday economy in terms of producing different types of economies, also using loans on microcredit tools. So I think that the challenge is how we are not obliged to choose in one direction or the other, the polarization that Supriya was talking about, how we combine this structural idea of course, credit economy is exploitative by nature, as somebody put it in the chat, but also how we can address the different collective strategies to produce other kind of economic strategies in the everyday life, but also with the power to confront the austerity mandates. I think that we have to take all the time the question how we can confront this austerity mandate from the everyday life.
Yeah. Another last two questions. One is to Supriya, one to Veronica. Veronica, the one is that you mentioned about new forms of indebtedness are emerging. Has household debt evolved to become more feminized over the years and got tied to gender roles?
Yes, I was talking about this before, because the feminized also feature of the crisis has to do with this more reproductive labor, with these different kinds of collective replacement that we have to do all the time in terms of replace public health or public infrastructure. So I think that this is a very important issue, how this new kind of indebtedness related to the crisis is increasingly more and more feminized.
Now the last question to Supriya. Isn't credit economy in itself an exploitative by nature? Does it seek to absolve the state of its responsibility of spending public money on its citizens, especially via policies like that, when the vulnerable groups often contribute public exchequer disproportionately via indirect taxation? Yes, that is also a very important question.
Yeah, I totally agree. As I said a little earlier, absolutely correct. But I think we do need innovations, and there is a responsibility for both researchers here and for public institutions for innovation. Where is innovation going to come from? Researchers need better theorizing of concepts like empowerment, and public institutions need to produce better data. I mean, there is really little, there's still lots of gaps in data that link credit to livelihoods to well-being. And what's quite glaring is that the microcredit sector, including banks that are actually mandated to improve outcomes on poverty and empowerment, are simply focused on repayment indicators based on banking principles, and they are totally disinterested in livelihoods. And I think those are points that really need, those are the challenges that are remaining, and those are where the innovations need to come from.
Yeah. So thank you, Veronica and Supriya, for an excellent, erudite, well-documented and analytically rigorous presentation. There are so many learnings of this, so many learnings of today's discussion. Luckily, all of us were on the same level of sensitivity and sensibility in terms of wavelength. Now, I would like to conclude with the summary that today's discussion highlighted that capitalist patriarchy is marked by naturalization of gender-based inequalities. Under capitalism, women's work is systematically demeaned with use of patriarchal value system that controls women's sexuality, fertility, and labor. Patriarchal domination is characterized by lack of rights for women and all marginalized sections of society, and domination is always aided and abetted by physical, moral, structural, and symbolic violence. Capitalism and patriarchy are two systems that reinforce each other. We accept that women's oppression preceded capitalism, but capitalism profoundly transformed it. Patriarchy, a founding principle of capitalism, and the confinement and inferiorization of women grant capitalism an opportunity to super profit making. An opportunistic and dynamic system of capitalism systematically undervalues women's work by creating dichotomy of the private sphere for men and public sphere for men and private sphere for women, and valorizing the notion of man as a bread earner and woman as a homemaker, and increasing that, as Veronica again gave several examples of how the reproductive labor of women have increased. It thrives on gender wage gap based on gender stereotypes of women as supplementary earners needing only part-time employment, which is, I think, the foundation of repatriarchization that is happening in several countries, especially the East European countries. In the South, women pay the price of capitalist expansion in terms of wage work in the so-called informal sector. And to combat patriarchy and exploitation of women in the age of globalization, transnational solidarity is very important, and for which this kind of dialogues are very, very important. And now I give the mic to Ananya Srivastava for her final comments.
Thank you. Thank you to the panelists for such an extensive and engaging session. There is incredible value in a conversation like this, especially in a capitalist society which constantly divorces the economic from the political and the worker from their work. I personally feel enlightened by this discourse, and I'm sure the audience feels the same way. On that note, I would like to remind everyone that you can stay updated on our past and future events and all our projects on the REIN website and all of our social media handles. This coming weekend, on the April 24th, we have a session coming up on rethinking care economy. So please keep an eye for it. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Both of you were really,
very much.
Brilliant. Yeah. So nice to know that the younger generation, because our generation was like, we were the street fighters in the 70s, no? Anti-war campaign and all, and the same legacy is continuing. That makes us, what, as Karl Marx said, no, I'm an eternal optimist. So that gives us optimism that though the oppressive order is there, but we are challenging it.
Indeed, indeed.
Thank you.
But it's thanks to your generation that our generation has it much easier.
Yeah. And today there are many from my generation who have taken part in the discussion because Nalini Nayak is heading Seva in Kerala, and I Mridu Lipan, and there are many other feminist thinkers also in today's discussion. Yeah.
Thank you, and we keep in touch.
Yeah, okay. We'll keep in touch. Yes, Supriya. We are, I think, now Facebook friends, so yeah, yes. We'll know about each other's concerns.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on social media at all.
Yeah, there is another Garikipati. I think another Gago. Yeah.
Well, no, you might find my profile on Facebook, but I'm not active. I haven't sort of come out of it.
Veronica is actually.
Back to the years back.
Yeah, you are correct.
Thank
Well,
you.
bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye, Ananya. And bye. Yeah.
Bye,
my
Ananya.
regards to-
Bye.
Yeah, both
Thank you.
Juhi and Priya.